My family hired a lawyer to legally rob my house because unmarried women don't deserve 3 bedrooms, and my dad secretly transferred the HOA bills to her. My name is Valerie, and I am 32 years old. If you looked at my life right now, you might think I had it all figured out. I have a stable career as a software engineer, a quiet life, and most importantly, I own my dream house. But what people do not see are the years of absolute exhaustion that paved the way to my front door. The journey to homeownership was not just a financial goal for me, it was a brutal test of endurance. After graduating with my computer science degree, I walked away with a mountain of student debt. While my friends and colleagues were spending their 20s going on weekend trips to Cabo, buying brand new cars, and eating at fancy downtown restaurants, I was living a completely different reality. For 6 straight years, I drove a rusted 15-year-old sedan that shuddered every time I hit the highway. I lived on cheap ramen noodles and meal-prepped rice and beans. I took on every single overtime shift I could find and spent my weekends staring at a glowing computer screen, doing freelance coding projects until my eyes watered. Every single bonus, every tax refund, every extra dollar I made went straight into a savings account that I refused to touch. It was a lonely way to live, honestly. There were nights I cried from sheer burnout, wondering if sacrificing my youth for a piece of property was actually worth it. But all of that doubt vanished the day I finally got the keys to my house 2 years ago. It is not a massive mansion, but to me, it is a castle. It has 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a beautiful backyard where I immediately planted a small garden. I painted the walls myself. I spent my weekends watching online tutorials so I could install a new tile backsplash in the kitchen. I converted the 2nd bedroom into my home office, where the morning sun perfectly hits my desk. The 3rd bedroom became my dedicated hobby space, where I can escape into painting and reading after a long week of writing code. Every single wooden floorboard, every fresh coat of paint, every piece of furniture in this house represents my blood, sweat, and identity. This house is my sanctuary. It is the physical proof that my hard work actually meant something. I felt safe here. That is, until my own family decided my sanctuary was nothing more than an unused asset waiting to be claimed. It started on a regular Monday evening when I was in the middle of installing a new smart doorbell. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It was brief, lacking her usual emojis. She just told me I needed to come over for a mandatory family dinner the next night, and that it was extremely important. I did not think much of it at the time, completely unaware that I was being summoned to my own execution. To understand why things escalated the way they did, you have to understand the dynamic between me and my younger sister, Nadia. Nadia is 30 years old, and growing up, she was always the golden child. She followed the exact path my parents considered perfect. She married her college sweetheart, Derek, a few years ago. Derek works as an accountant at a small local firm, making a very modest salary. A few years into their marriage, Nadia had her first baby, a sweet little boy named Toby, who is now 3 years old. And just 6 months ago, they welcomed a baby girl named Clara. Because childcare for 2 kids would cost more than what Nadia made as a kindergarten teacher, she had to quit her job. Now, they're entirely dependent on Derek's single income, living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment right in the middle of the city. I love my niece and nephew more than anything, and I genuinely felt bad for their living situation. The last time I visited their apartment, it was pure chaos. The living room was practically a warehouse for baby supplies. There were plastic toys scattered everywhere, a changing table wedged next to the television, and the constant smell of warm milk and diapers hanging in the air. Little Toby was sleeping in what used to be a walk-in closet that they had converted into a tiny bedroom, and Clara's crib was crammed right next to Nadia and Derek's bed. During that visit, I brought them some groceries and a few expensive educational toys I knew they could not afford. I was just trying to be a good aunt. But as I was sitting on their stained sofa, Nadia looked around her messy living room, sighed heavily, and made a comment that stuck with me. She said it must be incredibly nice to have a huge house with 3 bedrooms all to myself, just sitting there empty. She said it with this tight, forced smile, calling my spare rooms a waste of good square footage. I brushed it off at the time. I figured she was just a stressed, sleep-deprived mother venting her frustrations. I did not realize she was not just complaining, she was calculating. In my family's eyes, Nadia had fulfilled her ultimate duty by providing grandchildren. She was the family investment that paid off emotionally. I, on the other hand, was single and childless. To them, my success, my money, and my property were not my own. They were viewed as a family emergency fund. The first real red flag happened the day before the infamous family dinner, though I did not recognize it for what it was. I was walking up my driveway after work, exhausted from a long day of coding, and decided to check the mail. Usually, my mailbox is just stuffed with local grocery store flyers and utility bills. But mixed in with the junk mail was a crisp white envelope from my homeowner association. Now, my neighborhood has a very strict homeowner association, or HOA for short. They manage the neighborhood maintenance and send out a quarterly newsletter. I opened the envelope, expecting to read about new rules for trash collection or landscaping fees. Instead, my eyes locked onto the greeting printed at the top of the letter. It said, "Welcome to the community, the Derek and Nadia family." I stood there on my porch, staring at the paper for a solid minute, completely baffled. Why on earth would my neighborhood association send a welcome letter addressed to my sister and brother-in-law at my residential address? My first instinct was that it had to be some bizarre administrative glitch. Maybe Nadia had used my address to sign up for some promotional baby magazines, and the local post office system had cross-referenced the names incorrectly. Or maybe my parents, who lived in the next town over, had accidentally mixed up our contact information when renewing a family club membership. I actually laughed out loud, thinking about how ridiculous it was. I tossed the letter onto my kitchen counter, making a mental note to call the homeowner association office later that week to sort out the typo. I did not feel fear. I did not feel suspicious. I was completely blind to the fact that someone had deliberately logged into the association's portal and officially changed the primary contact name for my property. I made myself a simple dinner, laid out my clothes for the next day, and went to sleep, completely oblivious to the trap that had already been set and closed around me. The next evening, I drove over to my parents' house for the mandatory dinner. It was a Tuesday, which was already unusual for a family gathering. Usually, we only did big dinners on weekends. I brought a bottle of nice red wine and a small puzzle for Toby, expecting a casual evening of catching up. But the moment I stepped through the front door, the atmosphere hit me like a brick wall. The house was dead silent. There was no smell of food cooking in the kitchen. My mother greeted me in the hallway, and I immediately noticed her eyes were red and puffy, like she had been crying for hours. She gave me a stiff, awkward hug and would not look me in the eye. My father was standing near the living room, his arms crossed over his chest, looking defensive and stern. Nadia was sitting on the couch, bouncing baby Clara on her knee, staring at the floor. Derek was standing awkwardly by the fireplace, practically hiding behind his phone. But the most alarming thing was the stranger sitting at my parents' dining room table. He was an older man in his late 50s, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit. He had a thick leather briefcase open on the table, with neat stacks of paper arranged in front of him. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Valerie," my father said, clearing his throat. His voice sounded practiced, almost robotic. "Please come sit down. This is Sylvester Grant. He is a family mediator and attorney." My heart dropped into my stomach. An attorney? Why was there an attorney at a family dinner? My mind started racing through every terrifying possibility. Were my parents getting a divorce? Was someone terminally ill? Had Derek gotten into some kind of severe legal trouble with his accounting firm? I walked over to the table and took a seat across from the stranger. Sylvester offered a tight, professional smile and clasped his hands together. "Thank you for coming, Valerie," Sylvester said smoothly. "Your family has asked me here today to facilitate a very important discussion. We're here to propose a property swap that will be highly beneficial for the entire family unit." "A property swap?" I repeated, looking around the room. Nobody would meet my gaze. "Yes," Sylvester continued, sliding a thick printed document toward me. The proposal is quite simple. You will pack up your belongings and move into Nadia and Derek's two-bedroom apartment. You will assume their monthly rental payments. In exchange, Nadia, Derek, and their two children will move into your three-bedroom house and take over your mortgage. I literally let out a short, confused laugh. I thought it was a sick joke. I waited for my dad to crack a smile, or for Nadia to tell me they were just messing with me. But the room remained dead silent. They were entirely serious. They had invited me over to formally demand that I hand over the house I bought with my own money. Are you out of your minds? I finally snapped, pushing the document back across the table. I am not giving my house to Nadia. That is my property. I paid for it. I renovated it. I live there. That was the trigger my family had apparently been waiting for. Suddenly, the silence broke and the psychological warfare began. Nadia started crying on cue, holding Clara a little tighter. You are so incredibly selfish, Valerie. Nadia sobbed. You have no idea how hard it is to raise two kids in a tiny apartment. Toby does not even have a real window in his room. We have no backyard. You are just one person. You sit alone in a three-bedroom house doing hobbies while my children suffer. Why do you need all that space? Because I earned it. I shot back, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. I spent my 20s working 3 jobs and eating garbage while you were out partying and living a comfortable life. My house is not a community center for your kids. My father slammed his hand on the table. Do not speak to your sister that way. She is a mother. Unmarried women do not deserve 3 bedrooms when children are suffering. That is not how a family works. Family means stepping up and making sacrifices for the next generation. You have no dependents. Your lifestyle is a luxury, while their need for space is a necessity. I sat there, completely stunned by the audacity. They were not asking for a favor. They felt utterly entitled to my assets simply because I had chosen a different life path. In their eyes, I was paying a childless tax. Because I did not have a husband or babies, my hard work was invalid, and my property was up for grabs. Sylvester, the lawyer, leaned forward, tapping his pen on his legal pad. Valerie, I strongly advise you to consider this proposal voluntarily. If we have to take this to family court, things will get very messy for you. Courts consistently look at the best interests of minors. There is legal precedent for redistributing family assets to ensure children are raised in a healthy, spacious environment. You could end up losing the house and paying court fees. He was using legal jargon to intimidate me. He wanted me to believe that a judge could magically swoop down and rip the deed of my house out of my hands just because my sister decided to have kids she could not afford to house. There is no law in this country that forces a single woman to give her private property to her sister, I said, glaring at the lawyer. You are bluffing. Actually, it is not a bluff, Sylvester replied smoothly. You see, your parents have a vested interest in your property, which complicates your sole ownership. I frowned, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. What vested interest? I pay my own mortgage. I paid my own down payment. My father finally looked me in the eye, and the smug, unapologetic expression on his face made my blood run cold. When you first bought that house, Valerie, your credit score was just a few points shy of getting the best interest rate. So, I co-signed the original mortgage loan for the first 6 months before you refinanced and took my name off. Remember that? Yes, I said slowly. I refinanced. You are not on the deed. You are not on the mortgage. You have 0 legal rights to my house. That is true for the bank, Sylvester interjected. But not for the homeowner association. Because your father was on the original paperwork, he was still listed as an emergency contact in the neighborhood database. He simply exercised his right as a founding guarantor to update the residential contact information to better reflect the family's current living arrangement. Suddenly, the bizarre piece of mail I had received the day before flashed into my mind. The welcome letter addressed to the Derek and Nadia family. You, I stammered, looking at my father in absolute horror. You logged into my association account and changed the names? You put her name on my house bills. It is establishing a paper trail of residency, Derek chimed in from the fireplace, sounding entirely too confident. We are already officially registered with the community board. The lawyer says it gives us a massive advantage if you try to fight us. I felt the room spinning. This was not just an entitled family making an unreasonable request. This was a calculated, premeditated attack. My own father had committed identity fraud, using outdated financial documents to bypass a security system, all to help my sister steal my home. They had planned this for weeks, maybe months. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "Valerie, sit down," my mother pleaded, finally speaking up. "We just want what is fair. Just sign the agreement, and we can all go back to being a happy family." "We are not a family," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. "You are thieves." I did not wait for their response. I turned around, grabbed my purse, and walked straight out the front door. I ignored my father yelling my name from the porch. I got into my car, locked the doors, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I drove home in a complete daze, the realization washing over me like ice water. The people who were supposed to protect me had just declared war on my life. If you are listening to this and you cannot believe the absolute audacity of this family, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are living in right now. Every single comment helps this video reach more people, and I truly appreciate your support. Now let's get back to the story, because what they did next was completely unhinged. I barely slept that night. I just sat on my living room couch in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the front door. The reality of what my parents and my sister were trying to pull was too massive to fully process. I kept expecting to wake up from some bizarre fever dream, but the sick feeling in my stomach told me this was very real. By morning, I was exhausted, my eyes burning from crying and staring at my phone. I had just managed to drift off around 6 o'clock when a noise jolted me awake. It was a metallic click followed by the heavy thud of my front door swinging open. My blood ran cold. I froze on the couch, listening to footsteps echoing in my entryway. I lived alone. Nobody was supposed to have a key. And then, I heard Derek's voice casually echoing down the hallway. He was saying something about how they would need to repaint the trim because my color choice was too depressing. I threw off my blanket and stormed into the entryway. There they were. Nadia had little Clara strapped to her chest in a baby carrier, holding a clipboard, while Derek was literally pulling a bright yellow metal measuring tape across my living room wall. They both froze when they saw me standing there in my pajamas, looking like an absolute wreck. "What in the world are you doing in my house?" I screamed, my voice cracking. Nadia rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic sigh, as if I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Relax, Valerie. Dad gave us his old emergency spare key. We are just taking some preliminary measurements. We need to figure out if our sectional couch is going to fit in this corner, or if we need to budget for a new one before the move." I stared at her, completely flabbergasted. The sheer audacity of standing in my home, that they broke into, talking about replacing my furniture. "Get out," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the open door. "Get out right now before I call the police." Derek retracted the measuring tape with a loud snap and crossed his arms. "Do not be so dramatic," he scoffed. "The lawyer told us we have a solid case. You heard your dad last night. You are just dragging out the inevitable. We are moving in by the end of next month so Toby can start preschool in this district." I am not going to say it again. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "This is trespassing. I do not care what your fake lawyer said. If you do not walk out of that door in 5 seconds, I am dialing 911. Nadia's face turned bright red. "You are emotionally abusing your own nephew," she yelled, waking up the baby on her chest, who immediately started wailing. "You are literally hoarding wealth and space while my children suffer. You are a monster, Valerie. A selfish, lonely monster." I did not respond. I just picked up my phone from the console table and started dialing the numbers. Seeing that I was entirely serious, Derek grabbed Nadia by the arm, muttering under his breath about how crazy I was acting. They shuffled out the door, and the second they crossed the threshold, I slammed it shut and locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the heavy wood, my heart pounding so hard my ribs ached. They truly believed my house was already theirs. I had to call in sick to work that day. There was no way I could sit at a computer and write code when my family was actively plotting a home invasion. I spent the morning pacing around my kitchen, drinking black coffee, trying to figure out my next move. Around 11 in the morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the local elementary school district office, which was strange because I obviously had 0 children registered there. I answered cautiously. A polite woman on the other end introduced herself as an administrative assistant for the district's enrollment office. She told me she was calling to verify a residency application for a student named Toby Anderson, claiming my address as his primary residence. She explained that because the utility bill provided did not match the primary deed holder's name, meaning me, they needed verbal confirmation. My stomach dropped to the floor. They were not just taking measurements. They were actively filing legal paperwork to establish a paper trail. They were trying to create a documented history of Toby living at my house so that when they eventually took me to court, they could claim the child was already settled in the district and displacing him would cause emotional harm. "Ma'am," I said, gripping the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my fingers went numb. "That application is fraudulent. That child does not live here. The parents do not live here. I am the sole owner of this property, and nobody else has permission to reside at this address." The woman on the phone sounded shocked. She quickly apologized, said she would flag the application for fraud, and advised me to secure my property. That was the wake-up call I needed. I realized I could not just sit around and play defense. I had to lock down my life. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the nearest hardware store. I did not just buy one lock. I bought the most expensive, heavy-duty deadbolts they had in stock. I bought window security bars. I bought extra sensors for my alarm system. I drove back home and spent 4 hours with a power drill, completely replacing the front door lock, the back patio lock, and the side garage door lock. I stripped away the old hardware and installed the new metal plates, the noise of the drill echoing through the empty house. Every screw I tightened felt like I was physically building a fortress against my own flesh and blood. I was no longer the supportive aunt or the obedient daughter. I was a property owner under siege. That evening, the digital assault began. It started with a text message from my Aunt Susan, a woman I had not spoken to in 3 years. Her text read, "I cannot believe what I am reading. How can you be so incredibly heartless to your own sister? Your parents raised you better than this." 10 minutes later, a cousin from out of state sent me a message calling me an entitled, greedy brat. My phone started vibrating nonstop. I was completely confused until a mutual friend of mine and Nadia's sent me a screenshot from a crowdfunding website. Nadia had created a GoFundMe campaign. The title of the campaign was, "Help Our Kids Escape a Slum, Fighting a Greedy Relative." I felt physically sick as I read the campaign description. Nadia had spun a masterpiece of manipulation. She wrote a sob story about how her family was trapped in a tiny, unsafe apartment, struggling to survive on one income. Then, she directly mentioned that a wealthy, childless relative was hoarding an empty 3-bedroom house and was trying to extort them financially, forcing them into a legal battle just to secure a safe environment for her toddlers. She even included a picture of my house, my beautiful house that I painted with my own hands, taken from the street, framing it as the prize she was fighting for. She was trying to raise $10,000 for legal fees and relocation costs. It was a public execution of my character. She was weaponizing the internet and our extended family against me. As I scrolled through the comments, seeing strangers leaving donations and calling me a horrible person, I experienced a moment of profound clarity. I realized the concept of emotional bankruptcy. My family did not view me as a human being. They viewed me as an asset. As long as I was useful babysitting, buying expensive gifts, being the quiet and compliant sister, I had value. But the second I said no, the second I drew a boundary around my biggest financial achievement, my value plummeted to 0. They were emotionally bankrupt. They had no real love to give me, only expectations to enforce. I did not cry this time. The sadness was completely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. I went into my phone settings and switched it to Do Not Disturb, silencing all calls and texts from my contacts. The only notifications I left turned on were the alerts for my Ring doorbell camera. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to let them dig their own graves. I was going to collect every single piece of evidence, every threatening text, every fraudulent document, and I was going to burn their little scheme to the ground. First thing the next morning, I started searching for a lawyer. Not a polite family mediator, but a ruthless, shark-like attorney who specialized in aggressive property disputes. After a few calls, I found Penelope Reyes. Her office was in a high-rise downtown, and she had a reputation for destroying opposing counsel in court. I managed to get an emergency consultation that afternoon. Sitting in Penelope's sleek, glass-walled office, I felt a tiny fraction of control return to me. I dumped everything on her desk. I gave her the printed GoFundMe page, the screenshots of the threatening texts, the fraudulent homeowner association welcome letter, and a timeline of everything that had happened since that awful Tuesday dinner. Penelope reviewed the documents in total silence. She was a sharp woman in her 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit, and her expression never changed as she read through my family's insane demands. When she finally looked up, she pushed her glasses up her nose and leaned back in her chair. "Valerie," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "First of all, take a deep breath. Legally speaking, your family is completely delusional. They have absolutely zero claim to your property. The idea that a judge would evict a legal homeowner to give the house to a sibling with children is pure fiction. It does not exist in property law." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "But what about their lawyer? Sylvester Grant? He said they had a solid case." Penelope actually let out a short, cynical laugh. She turned to her computer and typed something into a database. "Sylvester Grant is not a real estate attorney. He is a strip mall lawyer who mostly handles traffic tickets, minor DUIs, and simple wills. I just checked his background. He happens to be a member of the same local golf club as your father. He is not preparing a legal case, Valerie. He is acting as a hired bully in a cheap suit, trying to scare you into signing a quitclaim deed voluntarily." The relief was overwhelming, but Penelope was not done. She tapped the homeowner association letter with her manicured fingernail. "However, what your father did here, using old financial records to bypass the association's security and change the billing entity, that is identity fraud. And this GoFundMe your sister created, soliciting donations under the false pretense of an active legal battle over property she does not own? That borders on federal wire fraud. They handed us the exact weapons we need to stop this." I hired Penelope on the spot, paying her retainer fee without a second thought. She promised to have formal legal notices drafted and sent out by the end of the day. I left her office feeling like I had just put on a suit of armor. But my family was not done making mistakes. I was driving back to my house when a notification popped up on my phone screen. It was an alert from my front porch Ring camera. I tapped the notification and the live video feed loaded. My heart leaped into my throat. A large orange and white U-Haul moving truck was backing into my driveway. I stepped on the gas, breaking the speed limit to get to my neighborhood. By the time I turned onto my street, the U-Haul was parked on my property. My father and Derek were standing on the lawn, unstrapping a large dining room table from the back of the truck. Nadia was standing near my front porch, holding Clara, looking extremely annoyed as she aggressively jiggled the front door handle, trying to figure out why the old spare key was not working. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was standing on her porch next door, watering her plants and watching the whole spectacle with wide eyes. I slammed my car into park right behind the U-Haul, blocking it in. I jumped out of the car, my hands shaking with pure adrenaline. "Put that table back in the truck," I screamed across the lawn. My father looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Valerie, calm down. We told you we were moving some of the bulkier furniture in today to save money on the rental truck. Now open the door. The key is jammed." "The key is not jammed. I changed the locks," I yelled, pulling out my phone. "You have exactly 2 minutes to get this truck off my property, or I am calling the police for trespassing. You would not dare call the cops on your own family, Derek scoffed, stepping toward me trying to look intimidating. You are making a scene in front of the neighbors. Stop embarrassing yourself and open the house. I did not argue. I hit the emergency button on my phone and dialed the police. I stood right there on the lawn and gave the dispatcher my address, stating clearly that I had aggressive individuals trespassing on my private property and attempting to force entry. When my dad heard me giving the dispatcher his description, the color completely drained from his face. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up with its lights flashing. The officers stepped out, and my father immediately tried to play the victim, claiming it was just a family misunderstanding about a shared property. I calmly handed the officer my driver's license and pulled up the digital deed to my house on my phone. The officer took one look at my documents, turned to my father and Derek, and told them they had exactly 5 minutes to pack up their truck and leave, or they would be leaving in handcuffs. Watching my arrogant father and my entitled brother-in-law silently shove a dining table back into a U-Haul under the watchful eye of armed police officers and Mrs. Gable was the most vindicating moment of my entire life. The police incident broke their momentum, but Penelope's legal paperwork was the nuclear bomb that ended the war. The very next morning, certified letters arrived at my parents' house, Nadia's apartment, and Sylvester Grant's law office. Penelope did not hold back. She sent a massive cease and desist letter outlining exactly what laws they had broken. She explicitly detailed the identity fraud regarding the homeowner association, stating that we had the IP address logs from the portal login. She attached screenshots of the GoFundMe campaign, explaining the legal definitions of wire fraud and extortion. Finally, she included the police report number from the trespassing incident on my lawn. The letter concluded with a simple, brutal ultimatum. If they ever contacted me again regarding the property, if they ever set foot near my neighborhood, or if Nadia did not immediately take down the GoFundMe and refund every single donor, Penelope would file civil lawsuits and forward the evidence of their fraud directly to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The collapse of their grand scheme was instantaneous and spectacular. Less than 2 hours after the letters were delivered, Penelope forwarded me an email from Sylvester Grant. It was a frantic, highly unprofessional email formally withdrawing himself as their representation, claiming he was misled by his clients regarding the ownership status of the property. He dropped them like a hot potato to save his own law license. An hour after that, I got a voicemail from my father. I listened to it while sitting in my safe, quiet living room. His voice was no longer arrogant or demanding. He sounded panicked, small, and terrified. "Valerie, please, you have to call off this lawyer," my father pleaded into the phone, his voice shaking. "You are threatening your own father with criminal charges? Over a misunderstanding?" Nadia took the internet page down. "We are returning the money. Please, you're destroying this family over a house." He was still trying to play the victim, but the power dynamic had permanently shifted. I did not call him back. I did not reply to Nadia's frantic emails begging me not to ruin Derek's accounting career with a fraud scandal. I let them sit in the terror they had created. They had tried to push me off a cliff, and they were only crying because I had strapped on a parachute and handed them the anchor. A week later, to wrap up the legal mess, Penelope organized a final, formal meeting at her office. My family was desperate to get in writing that I would not press criminal charges, and Penelope agreed, on the condition that they sign legally binding non-contact and trespass orders. I walked into the glass conference room feeling lighter than I had in months. My parents, Nadia, and Derek were already sitting there. They looked exhausted. They had scraped together money to hire a new, actual defense lawyer who sat quietly beside them, looking deeply embarrassed by his clients. Penelope slid the finalized documents across the table. "Sign these," she said coldly. "And my client considers the matter permanently closed." As my father picked up the pen with a trembling hand, Nadia suddenly burst into tears. And this time, they were not the fake, manipulative tears she used to get her way. It was a raw, ugly cry. "I am sorry," she choked out, looking at me across the table. "I am so sorry, Valerie. I saw your life. I saw your beautiful house and the way you can travel and sleep in and buy nice things. I love my kids, I really do, but my life is so hard right now. I felt like a complete failure. And it made me so insanely jealous of you that it made me crazy. I convinced myself that because you were single, you did not actually need your success. I convinced myself you owed it to me. For the first time, she was telling the absolute truth. The entire plot was never about what was fair for the children. It was about her deep, festering jealousy of my independence, fueled by my parents' toxic belief that I existed solely to serve the family unit. I looked at my sister, feeling a strange mix of pity and absolute coldness. I understand that you are struggling, Nadia, I said, my voice completely steady. And a year ago, if you had just asked me for a loan for a down payment, I probably would have given it to you. But you did not ask. You tried to rob me. You let Dad commit fraud. You brought a moving truck to my house. Jealousy is a feeling, but what you did was a calculated attack. I do not accept your apology. Her face crumbled, and she buried her face in her hands. My parents signed the papers without looking me in the eye. I stood up, shook Penelope's hand, and walked out of the conference room, leaving them behind for good. It has been 6 months since that meeting in Penelope's office. True to the agreement, Nadia took down the GoFundMe and refunded the nearly $2,000 she had manipulated out of strangers and extended family. I have officially gone completely no contact with my parents, my sister, and her husband. I changed my phone number, updated all my security systems, and finally let out a massive sigh of relief. The silence in my life is no longer lonely, it is peaceful. I still live in my beautiful 3-bedroom house. I still spend my weekends painting in my spare room and drinking coffee in my sunlit kitchen. My career has taken off, likely because I no longer have the mental drain of carrying my family's emotional baggage. I recently started dating a wonderful man named Marcus. When I eventually told him the story about my family, he did not call me selfish. He looked completely horrified and told me he was incredibly proud of how fiercely I defended myself. Having someone in my life who respects my boundaries without question has been the ultimate healing experience. I survived the emotional bankruptcy of my blood relatives, and I learned that setting a boundary is not a hostile act, it is an act of self-preservation. I built my sanctuary with my own 2 hands, and I will never apologize for refusing to let someone else tear it down. They say blood is thicker than water, but when your own blood tries to legally rob you of everything you have built, cutting ties feels like the only way to breathe. My mother still manages to send me letters every holiday, begging me to stop being stubborn and forgive them for what she continues to call a misunderstanding. So, I leave it to you, the jury of the internet. Am I the villain for choosing my hard-earned sanctuary over my family's entitlement? Should I ever let them back into my life? Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop your verdict in the comments below. See you in the next one.